and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome along to Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin. Today I'm joined by Daniel French. Really pleased to be with you today, Daniel. You're back after a Christmas and New Year's break, from the show at least. Have you been away on holiday at all? I didn't actually ask you that.
Yeah, we go up to Edinburgh and Aberdeen every year. The Scottish in-laws put on an amazing series of Hogmanay gatherings. So we have a big New Year's Eve party. My wife's one of 8. Nice. So there's a mass of grandchildren, cousins, nephews, nieces, and they're all very musical as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you do Scottish folk songs and things like that?
Yeah, they'll do. One of my brother-in-laws heads up a Scottish folk band. So nice. It was his wife's 60th this year, a couple of days before Hogmanay. So there were about 4 or 5 guitars and whatnots being strummed into the early hours. Lots of kilts and then the buffet of grey, which is usually the steak pie on Hogmanay and Quality nice. Street, and the traditional Scottish meal, tikka masala. It's a good laugh. It's a bit intense, but it's a good laugh. And then on afterwards, on the following day, on the 1st and the 2nd, the tradition is that you go around and first foot people. So you go around to neighbours and friends. So we just tend to go to relatives, mostly in Aberdeen, and you bring a gift to the house. Traditionally, years and years ago, you used to bring coal. To keep them warm. But you bring some party food, and people have got throughout those days a table laid out with kind of cold buffet, and it's a nice way to kind of just catch up and greet people and wish them well for the new year and that. So and also the if you're in Edinburgh, the Royal Mile is really stunning, because it's all laid out for the Hogmanay party, which was cancelled for the first time ever, I think, this year due to bad weather, which seemed a bit pithy, really. But you got all the Christmas markets, and it's as if Christmas, in England, particularly in sort of consumer secular Christmas, seems to fall apart by 3 o'clock on a Christmas day. Yeah. But there, the whole thing's kind of building up again towards this big celebration. So you kind of feel like you're doing a rerun, which is nice as clergy, because I know a lot of us clergy feel you don't really get to celebrate much of Christmas in some ways because you're so invested in making everyone else's Christmas special. So this, for me, going up to Scotland's a really nice way to get something back.
That's lovely, isn't it? I'm really pleased about that. I often sort of wonder, sort of modernity seems to sort of drain the life out of the culture of England for some reason in a particular way. And the extremities of our islands seem to retain their own distinctive cultures, even though obviously there are massive problems in Scotland and Wales, They still seem to retain that sense of cultural identity, don't they? In a way, in England, I think we really don't, at least I think in the South, and as you say, in sort of consumer type places. I don't know whether it's to do with, it's at least partly to do with affluence. I would say that mass immigration's got a massive amount to do with it as well. But what do you know what I mean? Like if you go to Scotland,
I think people are much more transit. We move around a lot more. I've come back to the place where I grew up, but I've never met anyone. Who I grew up with. Everybody moved out. And I think if you're constantly, I think we've got a lot more fluid population. You don't remember those traditions. I mean, when I got to Aberdeen, there are people who pretty much they're in the 70s and they've never lived anywhere else. So if you've got generations of that, I think, folk songs and stories and traditions kind of stay a lot more. Whereas like here in Devon, there's very few people who, like in South Devon, there's a particular accent.
Yeah.
Plymouth, there's a particular accent, but in it's very hard to find, true Devonians and what that means and what
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I meant by the sort of affluence thing is that people they go to middle class people go to university somewhere else in the country and then don't move back home. They end up living in like London or some anonymous urban centre and they don't, they just sit at home all day on the internet or watching TV in their spare time and then they're just completely sort of taken out and removed from the culture. Whereas with more traditional working class areas, those places are being flooded by immigrants essentially, and that's changing their culture, and it's perceived, as we've talked about many times, it's perceived in many places as a real threat. In fact, it is a real threat to the culture. Not to be too controversial, too early on in the show. So both for middle class people and for working class people, the culture is hollowed out. And also there's an ideological aspect to it as well, isn't there? Because there is a sense that Englishness is perceived or is critiqued as being racist, colonialist, that we're sort of gammons if we care about our own culture, or if we like our flag, or if we watch the English football team, or I mean, the English football team is probably one of the only significant cultural institutions that's left in this country that has widespread appeal, I would say, particularly
yeah,
across
I
classes.
suppose that and maybe the monarchy.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. But monarchy's not as
It's
popular as it
interesting
used to be.
because I mean I was teasing some of my in-laws who, are some are quite devoted to independence and the SNP, and so I took the sort of Peter Hitchens line and sort of teased them and said, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm voting for English independence," and it was quite a funny response actually. We sort of had, in good humour, and I said, "Well,
Yeah,
actually, I think." We're losing our English identity, and Britishness was okay, but I think maybe I was pitching this idea that maybe Britishness is more a cultural thing that
yeah,
we share rather than actually a sense of nationhood. And what we've probably
yeah,
been, well, we've certainly been English, and we're
yeah,
longer than we've been British in that respect.
yeah.
Um, but
I don't really think I don't think Britishness really means anything very
no
much
anymore, and
outside of the national identities. I don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
so they're going on about, oh well, and one of my brother-in-laws is going on about, I don't know, energy policy or something, and I said, well, the solution is in English independence. Good luck.
Yeah, yeah,
Go off and form your own nation. And I've always sort of joked with them that actually I'd put money down that if Scottish independence ever happened, that within 5 years there would be a conservative Scottish government,
interesting.
because the kind of social democratic beast would be let loose. And
Mm,
then generally after 5 or 10 years, the money runs out.
yeah,
And actually, I think Scottish people are very conservative in a small c sense. They're more traditional
yeah,
in many ways.
yeah,
And the problem is that if you've always got the spectre of England to blame
yeah.
for all your ills, but once you don't have that anymore, then you have to kind of readjust.
Yeah, then you have to actually take responsibility, don't you? It's like the Labour Party, isn't it? Who are, they could blame the Tories for while they're in opposition and then only for so long. But now they're in power, they've got to take responsibility for their own decisions.
Yeah, and that's crashing quite quickly,
Yeah, well, we'll talk
as
about
we
it.
will see in the show.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do our Bible reading, shall we, Daniel? And then we can do that. This will be interesting. So today we're going to read. So this is actually traditionally the reading for the second Sunday after Epiphany. So you have the Epiphany reading, which is about the wise men normally. Then you have the first Sunday after Epiphany is traditionally the baptism of Christ, and then the one that's coming up now, the Sunday that's coming up, this coming Sunday, is the second Sunday after Epiphany. So it's the wedding at Cana, which is from John chapter 2 and from verse 1 onwards.
Mhm.
Uh, And I'll say the Lord's Prayer now, Daniel, and you can maybe do the prayer at the end of the show if that's okay with you. And we'll just have a quick Bible reading and a discussion before we move on to talk about the news. So let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen.
John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. It's a really interesting passage, I think, when you start to think about it, because on the surface, it sort of seems fairly straightforward. You know, there's a problem at the wedding. Jesus has these miraculous powers, obviously, and he sorts it out. But then there's a sort of depth to it, I think, when you start thinking about the symbolism of the water and the wine, particularly. Now, I think if you like, the most sort of theologically precise and correct answer is that the transition from the water to the wine is saying something about the new covenant, which is inaugurated by Christ. So you've got the stone water jars, which are filled with water, and it specifically says that they're there for the Jewish rites of purification. So they represent the law, as it were, the sacrificial aspect of the law, in particular, you know, washing, cleansing oneself, but also, you know, the sacrifice of animals and so on. I think that's all, that sort of constellation of imagery is there, symbolized by those stone water jars, and then they're turned into wine, which clearly in the New Testament, and particularly in the Gospel of John, is linked with the notion of blood, and specifically Christ's blood, Christ's sacrifice on the cross is in view then. So, and you'd point, you know, John chapter 6, for example, but in many places that the link between wine and blood, and it's actually something that occurs in Scripture more generally as well. So that, I think, is the most kind of technically precise sort of angle, and it's probably what I'll preach on this week. But I also wonder whether there's something here about a sort of whether it can be applied to the world that we live in, if you like, that we live in a kind of watery world, where a sort of water world, to reference the Kevin Costner film, where you sort of picture this wedding, and it's like they had the wine was present, but then the wine ran out, and now they've just got water. And it's I sort of think of the secular world a bit like that. In a sense, we have wine, if you like, because we have affluence, we have technology, we have endless amounts of entertainment, distraction, opportunities for physical pleasure in that sense. But there's no real sense of spirituality. There's no depth to it. It's just all surface level. And after a while, one recognizes, at least, you know, this is certainly true for me in my life, but one recognizes the wateriness of it, what's the word I'm looking at for thinness of the whole thing. And I think in that sense, the wine of Christ represents the presence of God in our lives, in our world. And I think without that, you do have this very thin, watery, materialistic way of living, which sits uneasily with what we're actually created for. And I think particularly in modernity, you know, when you think about, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my reading Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor often talks about the sort of soulless and dehumanizing nature of industrial landscapes, slag heaps, rubbish dumps, ugly concrete buildings and all this kind of thing. Roads and highways and cars everywhere and smog and whatever it might be, lack of green spaces, lack of connection with nature. There's something about modernity which I think is particularly thin and empty in this sense. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting to analyze it from that perspective as well as the kind of technical theological side of things. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about. Any response to any of that, Daniel?
Uh, yes, I can see where you're going with that, and I think there's something to lean into, particularly in the way that the the account begins on the third day. Now, if I remember from seminary studies, that apparently is an allusion to the days of creation. That a
Right.
new creation
Interesting.
is happening, is awakening.
Yeah.
That it within the old creation is breaking through, and so we can look at this joyful miracle in that way that God comes. In this instance, it's not some kind of grand, horrific judgment or apocalypse. It is rather a breaking through of God's grace and power.
Mm.
It's a very sacramental reading, isn't it? It,
Yeah.
it has a wine is very tangible,
Mm.
drinkable.
Yes.
It it alludes to in the synoptic gospels. I can think of all those parables the of the kingdom of God as a feast, as a
Yes.
banquet, as a marriage, as the arrival of the groom, and so on. So it kind of fits into this sense of God's movement towards us being being one that is joyful as well as fearful,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's generous.
Yes.
That God isn't. Again, I think this is the way that the modernity looks through the wrong lens and sees everything spiritual in the minuscule. That
Yes.
somehow the things of God are pithy, passing. It's like stuff that you put in the attic that you
Yeah.
occasionally get out. Whereas this is an avalanche of generosity,
Mm.
and that again, that's a modernistic misreading. We're so caught up in our stuff that we can't see the grander picture.
Mm.
We can't see that the new creation dwarfs the old
Yes.
on almost infinite scales.
Mm. Mm. Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and it's very much sort of contrary to the notion that I mean is very prevalent, which is that God or being a Christian is in some way, well, it would constitute a diminishment of a person's life in this world. You have to just stop doing things, or you have to, it's about a taking away, it's about a negation of behavior or possessions or something like that. When in fact,
and a lot of stories of encounter, aren't they? Of conversion, where there is. I mean, I'm thinking of things like Trees of Avila's experiences, but I'm sure you can think of countless endless experiences where the respondent is overwhelmed with the love and generosity of God, and there is this euphoria which they have never experienced,
mm,
and I think we can see that in the best of our hymns as well,
mm,
or whether it's contemporary charismatic music. There
yeah,
is often this touch upon that God isn't just going to sort of give us the occasional drip of his presence, but wants to wash us fully
mm,
and to sweep us away. And again, I think that goes back to say how you can interpret the Song of Songs.
mm, yeah,
The kind of erotic, almost erotic love of God
yeah,
towards humanity.
yeah, 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 of course, yeah, yeah, very good, very good. Well, from the sublime to the, well, I'm going to call it ridiculous, but some of it's ridiculous, some of it's very sad. Um, so last week, Daniel, I was on with Tom, and we spoke a lot about these. I call them rape gangs because I think that's a better. I think grooming gangs is too euphemistic, personally. But we haven't spoken about this. You and I haven't spoken about this, so I thought we'd just mention this. So obviously, pretty much, I would have thought most people listening to this would know what's been going on in terms of these calls for a national inquiry into these rape gangs that have been operating in major urban centres in the UK. I don't know whether you've personally read any of the court reports, Daniel. I've not. I've just seen a couple of little images of them on Twitter, and the small amount I've seen is it's
No,
unbelievably
it's
evil.
repulsive, isn't
It's
it?
it's 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 like the kind of it actually reminds me of the kind of accounts I've read of things in concentration camps, and I don't want to go too far with this, but the reason I say that is because what these people have done, who have kidnapped these young white girls, is they have intentionally and creatively tortured them. They've actually they've put their intellect to work in trying to conceive of how they can make these girls suffer and be degraded to the greatest extent possible. And I think there's a particularly pernicious evil in that sort of use of the human intellect and human creativity to such an end. It's utterly demonic, I think,
Mm.
utterly satanic. Anyway, so there's that. Then this week there's this. It's funny how these two stories kind of join together because we also talked about the what's called the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, which is relevant to homeschoolers because it's going to it has the potential to change parents' rights to homeschool their children. But when there was the second reading of this bill in Parliament last week, Kemi Badenoch proposed a what do you call it, an amendment, which would entail a national inquiry into these rape gangs, and essentially that amendment was voted down
Mm.
because Labour don't want it. Question as to why exactly, but then several Labour figures, some of them reasonably prominent, like Andy Burnham, have come many a few MPs as well. I think the MP for Rochdale as well have come out and said there should be a national inquiry. So there's been a limited rebellion in the Labour Party to what at least seems to be the party line on this. So there's quite a lot of stuff there, Daniel. But just
Mm.
what's your sort of response to any of that?
And I suppose it touches upon, well, firstly, that a lot of left-leaning politics is now not about a class war; it's more of a culture war, and that kind of cultural socialism has moved, hasn't it, over the generations. Whereas I think, if you'd had a Labour Party looking at this in the kind of mid 1980s, this would be their thing.
Yeah, yeah,
But if you go and do unconscious bias training, it will cover race, sexuality, gender orientation, but it will not cover class.
yeah,
And it's this sense that progressivism has has withdrawn from the class warfare mainly,
yeah,
and so those who don't fit into the political narratives become the deplorables,
yeah, yeah,
and they lack a voice,
yeah,
a vehicle for representation, and so on. And you can see how we can get to that stage. I can remember doing safeguarding training some years ago when a former policeman who was delivering it said that the most vulnerable group in society in terms of children's safeguarding is not toddlers and
yeah,
little ones, because they tend to be highly most parents have got them on a short lease.
Yeah. Yeah.
The most vulnerable group is teenage girls.
Yeah. Yeah.
They are the ones who are going to be, taken advantage of. A 14-year-old teenage girl is many times more vulnerable than, say, a 3-year-old.
Yeah. 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 For sure. Yeah. And I think also the we were just when we were recording our uncollared bonus podcast, we were talking about the abstract imposing abstract ideology upon people's real lives and the way things really are in society. And this would seem to me to be a very good example of how the left really struggle in this area. I mean, tragically, I would say, or even criminally struggle in this area because they seem to be unable, and we saw this with Keir Starmer's speech last week, many of them at least, seem to be unable to put aside their abstract ideological commitments to things like multiculturalism and to just on a basic level to empathize with the suffering of these girls and their families who have been kidnapped, raped, tortured, injected with heroin, had their tongues nailed to tables, all sorts of awful things. There seems to be just an unwillingness to empathise. And to be fair, we've seen some Labour figures come out, and one might say, well, that's cynical or whatever. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But even so, in general, the vibe that's coming out is, well, all right, there might be all sorts of questions around what good would an inquiry do? It takes ages, really expensive. Nobody pays any attention to them by the time they report anyway. But it's just the lack of willingness to acknowledge what's been going on, what probably is still going on, and to be at least seen to care about it and to want to do something about it. That I think is something that is really, really troubling. And actually, I think it's indicative of the way that ideology in that abstracted sense is so dangerous because you can actually close your eyes to the real suffering of people. And as you say, Daniel, is because these people are working class white English girls, essentially. They don't count. So
their vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
Their buck doesn't count. There are so many ways in which within that constituency are de-empowered.
Yeah. Yeah, and
they are a group of people to which generally things are done to.
Yeah, yeah. And in your safeguarding training, I mean, hopefully not, but certainly you'd think in sort of DEI kind of settings, this is the group that is not spoken about. White girls, white working class boys. It's almost as though you can't be racist against white people, isn't it? It's like racism doesn't exist when applied to white people. So people are blind when it's actually happening. When I mean, it isn't. I wouldn't use. I mean, it is racist what's going on, obviously, because they've been targeted for their race. But it's far worse than just a sort of antipathy towards white people. It's specifically the targeting of white girls in order to torture and degrade them, and to humiliate them, and to destroy their culture. And so it doesn't get much more racist than that. But because of the abstract ideological commitments of the multicultural left, it's almost like they can't see what's actually happening. And it's so widespread as well. I was hearing, I think it was on David Robinson's podcast, that there was a rape gang in Oxford. And, that's funny. I used to live in Oxford. And it's just, you just think, where was that? It was happening, like probably walk past houses where it was happening. And, it's happening all over in a middle class, wealthy area. It's happening in all of these major centres. It's probably happening near wherever our listeners are in the UK. It's so widespread, so common.
And because one of the tragedies really of modernity, particularly in this country, and some of it's to do with the cold and the weather, people aren't sort of getting out and clubbing together so much, and because of the breakdown of, I think, the sort of working class sodalities and fellowships.
That would
keep an eye on this, keep an eye on on, that if you, the post-war generations, the Mothers Union, um, Girl Guides, Brownies, all these groups,
Yeah.
Sunday school, a lot of it church led.
Yeah. Yeah.
There were groups that where the vulnerable were kept an eye on,
Yes.
and it would have been very hard to break into those groups as a male,
Yeah.
and a lot of that's gone now.
Yeah.
A lot of teenage life is very solitary.
Yeah. Yeah. Very.
Sports clubs, sports clubs, art groups, all these things that cooperatives that are were, the engines of, say, the labor movement have now all gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so we don't have that safety net anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it is so sad, isn't it? I look at this and I just feel almost helpless before it because you think, I mean, one of the things I think is where is the church? How could the church help? And I
Mm.
think that the Church of England, in many cases, is so ideologically crippled that it probably can't help. In, I mean, I don't know. There may be some churches on the ground and some vicars doing some really good work in these areas, but on the
Yeah,
whole,
I think at a national level, they've been very quiet in the last couple of
oh
weeks.
yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of them have been. There's been this sort of mild exodus from X because
Oh yeah, it's pathetic.
we don't like the way that it's going. It doesn't align with our values. Blah
Yeah.
blah blah. But um,
Yeah, when X has actually been responsible for publicizing this more than any other platform in the world by
you know,
difference distance. Sorry. Yeah.
again in the mid '80s, the church published this report, Faith in the City, which is all about supposedly putting all the focus onto the inner city deprivation and for the church to be the engine of renewal, and it's really not gone anywhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having worked in a states ministry, I've probably done about 10 years at least in a states ministry. I can tell you it's unglamorous.
Yeah. Well,
And you start rattling the can for youth work and support and funds
yeah.
in comparison to international causes. I've had people tell me to shut up because it's embarrassing
Yeah.
or embarrassing us because essentially we don't like the idea of this kind of cultural deprivation at our doorstep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the areas where I would like to hear some bishops actually saying something. I haven't heard any. Maybe they have. I don't know. I haven't heard anyone saying anything, but it does boggle the mind, doesn't it? I haven't. I mean, maybe he said something, but somebody like Philip North, I would have thought would be
Mm.
speaking about this because he's talking about the poor quite a lot of the time in working class areas in the north of England. Where are the bishops? Why are they not? Why are they not saying anything about this issue? I mean, really, why are they not saying anything? Because they don't want to be seen to be racist, because they don't want to be tarred with the far right brush. People have got to start caring more about the suffering people involved in this than their own reputations. And as I say, I haven't done a full check of
Well, the good shepherd leaves the 99
yeah,
to seek
exactly.
out the one lost,
Yeah,
and uh,
yeah,
that is
yeah.
career costly.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, let's I think it would be good to reflect upon Christ, his teaching about children and what he says to us about the way we are to receive children. And I think that that would be highly applicable in this situation. But we should move on, Daniel, to the other sort of major story, I suppose, politically is around the economy. Now, I think the sort of
Have we got one?
No, well, no, not really. Increasingly, so the optics this week basically is the economy is sort of crashing in the UK. Really, what have we had? So we've had zero growth in the third quarter of 2024, which is seen as a direct result of Rachel Reeves's budget and her policies. There have been rising borrowing costs, inflation concerns, market uncertainty, and investor confidence is very low. And this is all a result of significant tax hikes, including a £40 billion rise in employer national insurance contributions as a result of the budget. Again, so what was Rachel Reeves, our Chancellor, Rachel from accounts, as she's sometimes called, what was she doing this week? She was in China making a trade agreement with China, which I think was for something like, was it like $600 billion? I can't remember the currency actually, but it was a big deal she was doing in China. But many people were saying she should have been in this country and she should have been here defending her economic policies, defending the budget, and giving investors confidence that they can invest in this nation. Because as many people will know, a lot of this isn't so much about algorithms and facts. It's about the way people feel about things, whether they're confident so that they can invest in the economy, so that they can, invest in this country, have their businesses here, and so on and so forth. But her absence from the scene has been seen as a real weakness. Now, Daniel, I did want to play a funny clip here, which I saw, which kind of made me laugh a bit. I don't know whether you actually saw this. Did you see this that I put on here? The Andrew Lawrence clip?
No, go on.
Now, for some reason, my Zoom is making me type in a password to play the computer audio. I'm not sure it's going to work actually, which would be a shame. I don't know why this is. Something's gone wrong with my computer sound for some reason. Oh yeah, no, it is actually. No, I think we're okay. All right, let's have a listen to this. Tell me if you can hear this, okay, Daniel? Okay, here we go.
Rachel from accounts has broken our economy within 5 months. Now she's in China, of all places, with a...
Can you hear that? Is that okay? Daniel, could you hear that?
Yep, I can hear it.
Okay, right, let's continue. I'll just go back to the beginning, actually. Let's go. This is Andrew Lawrence.
Rachel from accounts has broken our economy within 5 months. Now she's in China, of all places, with a begging bowl. That's bound to end well, isn't it? If you can't trust China, who can you trust? She lied on her CV as her political ambitions spiralled out of control, and now as Chancellor of the Exchequer, she's out of her depth and we're all suffering the financial consequences. I mean, Labour weren't terribly forthcoming about what their policies would be once they got into government, but few amongst us truly thought they'd plunge us all into abject poverty this quickly. It's impressive in a perverse sort of way, just the sheer speed at which they've turned us into a third world country. They must be doing it on purpose, surely. Our elected government can't be this stupid, can they? I mean, even an idiot like me with very little interest in managing my own personal finances, let alone a national budget, can see a clear path out of this mess and back to prosperity. Number one, scrap all DEI roles in the public sector. That'll save you millions of pounds straight away. Sack a bunch of grossly overpaid people who contribute nothing to productivity, but spend their time stirring up a load of identity-obsessed anger and division. Number two, scrap the UK's net zero commitment. Highest electricity prices in the world. £22 billion on wind farms and carbon capture. Might as well just chuck our entire GDP into an industrial shredder. Number three, bring net migration down to zero. Small island, too many unskilled people, complete lack of basic infrastructure, and yet inexplicably we allow our country to be used as a landfill site for every violent criminal and shameless nonce who's been ejected from the third world. Number four, crack down on benefit fraud. Make it easier for people to get a job than a disability diagnosis, and you might start to see a bit of economic growth. Number five, tell the unions to get stuffed. Train drivers drivers on 90 grand a year need to be sacked and replaced by people who are willing to sit on their arse and push the same buttons for 40 grand a year. Number 6, tax breaks for businesses. Encourage industry and commerce rather than hobble it with taxation. Doesn't take much brain work, does it? Number 7, freeze all foreign aid, including funding for Ukraine, until we've managed to claw our way out of our current status as a third world country. Number 8, make all public sector pensions performance related. That'll get the lazy bastards to do some actual work, won't it? Number 9, sack all civil servants with demonstrable political affiliations and all those who can't explain to you in a single sentence what their actual bloody job is. Number 10, sack Rachel Reeves. There you go, economy fixed. Let the good times roll. None of that will happen, of course, because none of that will lead to this country and its people being entirely subsumed by corporate globalism, which is, of course, the ultimate aim of the godless wretches who haunt the corridors of Parliament, determined to drag us all on a miserable, rapid descent into hell. Have a lovely week, everyone.
There we go. I mean, I actually think that those policies are pretty good. Those 10 policies. I mean, some of them might be hard to implement, but those 10 policies would save a lot of money. I think
the one I would add would be I would have a moratorium on universities funding themselves through overseas students.
Right. Yeah.
For a 10-year stop on it. And actually what would happen was most universities would go bust.
Yeah.
And then use the accommodation, sell the accommodation to people who want to get on the housing ladder.
Interesting, yeah.
And what's left, some of it you could actually turn into polytechnic villages.
Yeah.
Where you could do, I mean, this is another thing where I've worked in the university sector, and 15, 20 years ago, they were rubbing their hands in glee to degreeify anything that moved, and to make massive amounts of money clawing in overseas students. Many of these degrees and courses are unnecessary. If you want to, for instance, become an accountant, I think you could do an accountancy course at night school. You could do an intense year of study, and like most accountants did in a bygone age, and nurses and journalists and and so on, built their way up through the process. But everything that is not even, it goes beyond even sort of white collar jobs now. Everything is degreeified. And this has created, I think this is one of the things that's really caused a problem, is the enormous amount of people coming in from overseas on the back of that, which are propping up universities that are selling noddy degrees. And so our kids are leaving with 100 grand debt.
Yeah.
Whereas 60 years ago, in the same profession, it wouldn't have cost them a penny.
Yeah. No, you're right. Another good idea. There are all sorts of good ideas.
Funny, isn't it, that in America, there are some circles around Musk and others where they're talking about seeing if they can aspire to zero income tax.
Right.
Because there are some parts of the world where
there are
cities like Dubai, isn't it, where there's
Monaco, I think, has zero
income tax.
And
if they can do it, why can't we? Why are we at a stage where we're paying more taxation than if you lived in Soviet Russia?
Yeah, it's an ideological thing, isn't it? It's because, I mean, I think, what Andrew says is true, is that there's an element of intention about it. Not necessarily the intention to make us poor, but the intention to have a massive state, and there's an ideological component insofar as people like, I would say probably Starmer, but certainly people like Jeremy Corbyn genuinely believe that if the state ran everything, if only the state could be in charge of everything, then things would be a lot better than they currently are. You know, the state was in control of the media. He was tweeting about that last week. Things would be a lot better. So there is that sort of ideological commitment to the state as the curative to society's ills. But then I think there's also a sort of sense of entitlement that people
Mm.
like this have, where they think that people don't deserve to have their money, you know, the money that they earn or whatever. They don't really deserve to have this money, and they don't deserve to have their possessions, and that that money and those possessions really belong to the state, and that's actually a moral good because then the state can redistribute those things fairly.
Yeah, and also that the state can encourage this plethora of bullshit jobs where people who in the professional class, again, a couple generations ago, may have been, say, running a chain of shops
Yeah,
or been on the front end of industry, doing and making things in a supervisory role,
yeah,
which was a lot more, you know, there's a lot more risk in that, isn't there?
yeah,
There's the you got to have a certain faith in yourself and your country and your abilities. There's risk that it could all fall apart. And I think what we now have is these jobs which are so safe and meaningless
mm,
that there are people who are passing bits of paper around or endlessly putting out policies and spreadsheets and PowerPoints at quite a cost, and
mm,
can argue their
yeah.
their existence, but actually they're not on the front end of making anything.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not an economist, right? But it seems to me just to be quite obvious that if you tax the private sector and you therefore discourage investment in the country, people take their businesses elsewhere, there's less money in the economy, and then on the other hand, you also increase the spending of the public sector. So you employ all these people to do all these jobs. You're inevitably going to bankrupt the country because you're not having, because the amount you're taking out of the economy through the public sector is more than the amount that's coming
Yeah.
in through the private sector, right? So it just seems to me to be a simple matter of economic
Mm.
comparison between income and expenditure. So it doesn't make any sense to me. How do they think the economy is, I mean, literally, I don't know. How do they think the economy is going to grow through taxing business, through like corporation tax and things like that? How? I mean, it doesn't work. I literally have no idea what they think they're going to
No. and
spend.
and it's not as if that revenue was being invested into grand Napoleonic projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would, let's say, an extraordinary, brilliant railway network.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah.
That you could say, well, maybe we need 5 years of
Yeah.
that kind of government
Yeah.
to push through that. No, what you end up with is these soft projects where it's all DEI because it's easier, it's lazier on the it's more abstract. You can work from home
Yeah.
doing this stuff, and that's again another sort of post-lockdown thing that we've had is this. A lot of people are now stuck at home, professionally working from home, and a lot of people are stuck at home on the other economic scale, just you know, living on benefits, and it makes almost no economic sense to risk,
Yeah.
say, say getting a job and then getting your self-worth back, even though because you might lose a grand a year.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
probably will initially be slightly poorer and a little bit more on the edge. But if the narrative from the past 20 years of government has been stay home and keep safe,
Mm.
you're going to do that economically.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think the only sort of good news in this situation is that eventually, well, maybe at the next general election, I think people are they're going to be so poor they'll vote against it, and there'll have to be some kind of backlash economically, probably in other ways as well. because it is just so, like Andrew says, it's so sort of self-destructive. But Daniel, we should move on to some other stuff. So one of the other stories this week that sort of caught my eye, and you actually alluded to part of it at least earlier, is this whole thing around social media. So the big stories, I would say, is that Meta have decided to end third-party fact-checking and employ a more community notes-based system so that will be in place on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. Obviously, the left are up in arms about this because they're saying it's going to allow, paedophiles and terrorists and rapists and goodness knows what else and climate change skeptics to post their nasty things on social media. But Mark Zuckerberg, head of Meta, went on Joe Rogan, and he was actually talking about the pressure that the government had put on them to censor their platforms. Essentially, now I'm not trying to vindicate him by saying that, but it's just interesting to hear him being so open about it.
And he's got rid of Nick Clegg.
Yeah, Nick Clegg is gone, and I think I can't remember who's replacing, but it's a Republican of some sort has replaced him, isn't it?
Clegg had the highest salary on the planet.
The highest salary on the planet.
Yeah, it was extraordinary, the salary that he was being paid for Facebook.
Wow, I had not heard that.
No.
Well, I mean, this is clearly an attempt on the part of Meta to placate the incoming Trump government. There was actually quite an interesting quote. I've got an article from NPR. It was actually quite funny. I'll see if I can find it. Because Trump was, here we are. Trump was interviewed about this, and he said, "I think they've come a long way." Trump said during a press conference on Tuesday, asked if Zuckerberg was, quote, directly responding to the threats that you have made him in the past. Trump responded, probably. I love that. I mean, what other politician would just take a question like that head on and say, yeah, probably. He's probably responding to the threats I made to him. So it looks like Meta are towing the political line that's coming.
I mean, if you think about what was happening, it's so Orwellian. It literally is Orwellian. You've got people, these platforms employing tens of thousands of people to sit working from home, or in some glitzy Silicon Valley office, monitoring our speech.
Yeah. What are they doing?
Just like Winston in it's almost identical to the job.
Yeah, it's true.
And then massaging the news this way or that way, and genuinely thinking that they're part of the Rebel Alliance.
Yes,
they're the hero of the story.
They're the ones who are going to save vulnerable people and save the world from climate change. I mean, it must be quite an easy job in some ways, because all you'd need to do is just go on the BBC or the NPR website if you're in America, cross-check that with what people have written, and if it contradicts it, just take it down. Simple. But I actually think the community notes thing is clearly a lot better, because it's not censorship, but it does give people the opportunity to bring an alternative perspective on things if it's called for. And part of the problem with this whole thing about fact checking is, and Zuckerberg himself said this, I mean, again, whether he's being disingenuous or not, that's an open question. I think it probably is to a certain extent. But he said, the whole thing has become politicized. And that's because it's not just as simple as saying, well, there are just these objective facts that we can all access as long as we're honest and good enough. It's actually the way that things appear is perspectival. It's not to say there's no truth. It's just to say that people have different perspectives on things. Scientific information can be interpreted in different ways, as can all other types of information as well. So the whole notion of fact checking is predicated on the idea that truth is this kind of a static, accessible thing. And that's a very unnuanced and unrealistic view of what truth actually is and how we access it. So something like community notes is a lot better, I think, because it's more dialogical in that sense. There's more of a sense of backwards and back and forth and communication and everything like that. Now, I'm not saying, some stuff I think should be, it should be taken down. Criminal content, pornography, pedophilic material, obviously. But a lot of the time, we're not really talking about stuff like that. We're talking about people posting about the COVID vaccine or about climate change or I don't know what
Yeah.
else, DEI stuff and that sort of thing. Those are the things that are being taken down. And what people are doing is they're saying, oh, X is an unsafe platform now because there's less censorship on it. And as you said, Daniel, earlier, there's been this sort of movement within the Church of England to leave X and to go to this other platform called Bluesky, which I've never been on Bluesky. Have you been on it? I've never been on it myself. Have
No,
you ever looked at it?
no, I haven't. No, I mean it just sounds like pearl clutching, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds. I mean, who would really want to be on this Bluesky platform? Because it's just going to be a total echo chamber, isn't it? It's going to be an echo chamber of the left. They don't want to be on Twitter because they don't like Elon Musk. They don't like the fact that he's in control of it. That he's not censoring people who disagree with what they say, and so they're now going on a different platform. But what's the point? I mean, honestly, what is the point of that? So, so we've got all that kind of stuff going on there. Any comment on any of that, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean there'd been I think it's Bristol Diocese, Norwich Diocese, and Winchester Diocese have left
The
X.
Winchester Diocese has, really?
Yeah.
Are you
Wow.
joking?
No, it's a couple of days ago. It's on the thing, Winchester.
Ah.
Go and have a look.
Oh, yeah.
And several bishops. There was one who was on X a couple of days ago, saying, "Oh, we must all stay, even though it's,
Even though it's awful, even though it's terrible.
it's awful, it's terrible, it's unsafe, it's dangerous, it's full of extremist views and whatever. We've got to stay put, which is fair enough. In some ways, that's a noble thought, but I think the analysis is a bit weird, particularly if we go back to what we were saying earlier on about the rape grooming gangs thing that X has been at the forefront of pushing that to the agenda.
Yeah,
But
you're right. You're right. There's a pinned post here, and the
uh,
Diocese of Winchester, and there's many people who are criticizing them. Sorry for this. I mean, there's nobody saying it's a good. I mean, obviously it's people on Twitter, but
and again, what always makes me laugh when these very corporatist announcements are made. We, the Diocese of Bristol, are leaving X. And you think, well, who is the we here? What you mean actually is the diocesan curia. You mean half a dozen people in the comms site, and a few others have said, I don't like this, doesn't fit with my politics. And I don't want to be we don't want to be associated with this platform because sometimes when we put something out there, people reply and put comments that we don't necessarily agree with. Ouch, that really hurts. But the we here is not the whole 30,000 people that make up the diocese.
yeah,
But I always try to find that really funny. Like, when you get this, we in the Church of England think, blah, 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 blah. You think, no, it's actually 3 or 4 interns and some comms people think you're not the deposit of faith here.
yeah. I think also I mean, I don't know whether they put out a press release or something like that, but just to tweet like that and not to give any explanation or, they say, if you need to contact the team, please do so via communications@winchester.anglican.org. That's what they're doing is they're essentially cutting themselves off from everybody. Goodness knows, I would imagine there are hundreds of millions of people on Twitter.
Not that they were getting massive, they were getting enormous volume.
Well, I mean, Winchester has 4,358 followers, which is not bad. Their tweets are being seen by hundreds of people. Not loads, obviously, but there's one here which is seen by 1,000 people. I mean, people are seeing these things. How many people are going to see them on Bluesky? How many people are on Bluesky? I mean, I'm literally going to ask Grok now how many people are on Bluesky, but it's essentially just withdrawing, isn't it? Let's see how many people are on Bluesky. Let's see how many people are on Bluesky. So the Grok tells me there are 25.47 million users registered on Blue Sky. Okay, how many people are on X? Let's have a look at this. So 25.47 million. Twitter, 611 million monthly active users worldwide. So Twitter is what? Approximately, what's that? 20
Sometimes
times
bigger.
bigger than Blue Sky, and 611 million people on it. So you're cutting yourself off from 611 million people who could potentially see one of your tweets. To me, that seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Mm.
Um, my friend Sam Norton, who's got a really good blog called Elizabethanian, he wrote a good blog on this talking about why he's staying on Twitter. So he's got some reasons here. So he says Twitter is the village square for the world, at least the western part of it. That's the reality. All the purported rivals like Threads have fallen short because they cannot catch up. Blue Sky will suffer the same fate, which means that if you need to work out what's happening, and most especially if you want to speak into that common conversation, this is the place to be. His second point is that Christians are not called to withdraw into holy huddles apart from the world. There are some people who have that specific vocation, but for most people, our duty is to go out into the world bearing witness and sharing the good news about Jesus. So we need to do that on Twitter. And then thirdly, and the best thing about Twitter is it exposes you to disagreement, at least if you use it intelligently. The great blight of the last several decades, and of the last decade most of all, is the increasing polarization of discourse, and in particular, the detachment of received opinion, consensus in brackets, from common sense. The starkest and most painful form of that resolved around questions of gender and transition, but the rot has spread much wider. He goes on from there, and he also calls Elon Musk a great man. He says he's great for several reasons because he thinks he'll succeed in colonizing Mars, but his purchase of X is also of long-term significance. The mainstream consensus, what I call the bubble, has gone very wrong, and indeed it continues to go very wrong. Here in the UK, this can be seen with the appalling grooming gang scandal, not just the evils committed, but in the often unconscious, I hope, covering up that has followed. Musk turning a searchlight onto this situation is an immensely hopeful sign. The more people that are aware of what has happened, the more likely it is that we will start to make the difficult decisions needed to ensure that it stops and that the guilty are punished.
And I think also that it has created nuance in some of the international conflicts, that politicians are able to get feedback, maybe even certainly disagreeable feedback in terms of both the Israel-Gaza conflict and also the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Yeah,
That you, if you take, say, for instance, the Russian-Ukraine conflict, I think the reaction and the cynicism, particularly amongst Gen Z males who are thinking, well, I'm not sure I want to get called up to war to this.
yeah,
That there's more to this, that the brutality and carnage of the conflict is more complicated than, say, the mainstream media is putting, and that there's a low resolution and there's a high resolution way of
yeah,
looking at this.
yeah, yeah,
And the high resolution way may save us from calamity.
yeah,
So I think it's made a bit of uh, it's put some pressure back on some who've held to a very bland narrative around this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree. This whole thing, it just makes me. It's one of those things where I just see this. I see the situation so differently, clearly, so differently to the way these, these whatever you want to call them, the diocesan like apparatchiks and the sort of multicultural elite, a metropolitan elite or whatever you want to call them. I just see this like X is a platform which is less censorious than it used to be. So that's surely a good thing because it means that we can have more open debate and people can be exposed to different ideas and different perspectives. And the other good thing about it, like Sam says, is that it's opened up this whole issue of these rape gangs, the grooming gangs in the UK, and surely that's a good thing. So why would you want to oppose it? Is because Musk has thrown his lot in with Donald Trump, basically. So it's a kind of it's a political
Yeah,
opposition.
and I think someone like Musk stands for a kind of vision of what can be done, which is so they would see as idiosyncratic compared to technocratic.
Yeah,
If you can land a 17-story rocket,
yeah, yeah, no,
um,
yeah,
you've got the job that every little boy
yeah,
probably has at some point dreamed about,
yeah,
and there you are making things, you are doing things, and you're pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Now, I'm not, trying to idolize Musk in that respect because I think there are issues and problems as well around some of the stuff he does. But from an engineering manufacturing point of view, that this is sort of going back to there's something kind of almost dance spiritual about this,
mm,
and that this is for all the advances of the 21st century, we're not actually a very we're not as inventive and as industrious, I think, as we think we are.
yeah,
Uh, and that if you look at the whole kind of gender wars things, I think a lot of that could be placated by getting back to stuff. Again, it's that Ian McGilchrist, right brain, imaginative, making stuff, pushing boundaries, having faith, in God, yourself, and your country, to think we can do this,
yeah, yeah,
rather than where a sort of toxic. It's better just to stay at home, work from home, or work or you know, don't push the boundaries. Don't do something unsafe. Don't blah de blah de blah. That narrative, that kind of evil matriarch narrative,
mm.
is suffocating the energy out of our civilization.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right, Daniel. Well, I think we've spoken a lot now about various things. The other big thing that's going on in the world at the moment is these wildfires in California.
Yeah,
Trump has blamed
going.
Gavin Newsom, hasn't he? Because something to do with Gavin Newsom not signing some kind of form which would have allowed them to use water from a particular source that had various type of fish in it that Gavin Newsom wanted to protect. But I don't know. I think with this particular story, the main issue really is just the awfulness of the scene. It's almost apocalyptic. I don't really know whether you've seen many of the pictures, Daniel, but
Mm.
it is absolutely crazy the way that so many communities have been just utterly destroyed. They're just gone. There's schools, infrastructure, houses, obviously, and churches as well. In the Church Times, they had an article about various churches that had been completely destroyed, which is all very sad. So I don't really have very much to say about it apart from that. But do you have any thoughts on it, Daniel?
I was watching Joe Rogan with Mel Gibson, and Mel Gibson said that his house has been burnt down and that God reduced him to being a man without stuff. I mean, I'm sure
Right.
he's got lots of money, but
Yeah.
he said, I'm currently a man without stuff,
Yeah.
without a place, without. So in many ways, it's been a great leveler. Um, I know that on X, there's been various angles on this which have said, that the progressivist regime have been shown not only to be unable to make things, but unable to save things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Yeah.
if we build up a culture that is so woo woo and wet, when these disasters happen, I think it it's much worse.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sort of hesitant to politicize this too much, but I do have a list of things here. So there have been criticisms over democratic policies around water management, water storage and distribution for firefighting, forest management, that the Democrats haven't been aggressive enough with forest management practices such as controlled burns, forest thinning and clearing underbrush, budget cuts. Some Republicans have pointed out budget cuts to fire departments, particularly in LA, by Democratic leadership. DEI initiatives, critics from the Republican side have suggested that a focus on DEI has distracted from or compromised fire response capabilities. This has included criticism of the LA Fire Department's leadership appointments and hiring practices, infrastructure and policy, criticism that Democrats have not done enough to invest in or maintain infrastructure like dams and reservoirs, which could be used for water storage. And then political rhetoric. Republicans have accused Democrats of politicizing the disasters rather than focusing on practical solutions, pointing to instances where political leaders have been out of state during critical times. This also extends to the way federal aid has been managed, with some Republicans suggesting it should be contingent on policy reforms. And of course, as with all of these, whenever anything like this happens, it's always blamed on climate change by people who want to advocate that particular agenda.
Well, I think a true conservatism keeps its eyes on the particulars, doesn't it, rather than the abstract.
Yeah.
And I suppose whatever, okay. So let's say even if it is to do with climate change, there's still how you manage a city and a county has to do with actually rolling up your sleeves and keeping your eye on the particulars.
Yeah.
And how come it is that say one individual's
Yeah.
ability to start a fire can create mass arson. That says something about how that city is organized.
Yeah, definitely. And you're quite right there, Daniel, because even if it's all true, and I'm very skeptical about it, but even if it were all true, and we could turn back the temperature through reducing our carbon emissions, and that this would make all these terrible weather events stop. Even if that were true, it's not going to happen for a very, very long time. And indeed, it probably is never going to happen because of the amount of carbon dioxide that's being emitted. So even if it were possible and true and plausible that it was going to happen, it wouldn't be happening for many, many years, would it? Whereas what we're talking about here is tangible, concrete things that could be done: water management and storage, forest management, investment in the fire service, and so on and so forth. Things that could actually be done on the ground to protect people and help people, which, well, I mean, it seems like they could have been done a lot better, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if the reason this is partly, at least, because of political ideology, that this is happening in this way. But it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to comment because obviously I don't really know very much about it. I'm just I'm reading stuff about it. I'm not there. I don't know. We should finish in a moment, Daniel, if that's all right. Let's do a little plug for some support. So if you listen to the podcast and you enjoy it, please do support us, because we need your support. We rely on it. I don't have an income from my church. I live in a church house, but I rely on the income I make through podcasting and writing to live. So I really do appreciate it if people do support the podcast. So the way you can do this is by going to our website, revpod.com, scrolling down a little bit and clicking on the big red button, which is to become a patron of the show. And if you do that, you get our bonus audio podcast, which is called Uncollared. And I also release the episodes early as soon as I get them. And on Uncollared, we talk about just kind of behind the scenes stuff, whatever's on our minds. Today we had a very interesting conversation about some books we're reading and about various other things. But yeah, if you do that, that costs £1.50 plus VAT in the UK per month. It's not very much money to do that. You can of course give more if you'd like to, but that's the minimum amount, which is hopefully affordable to anyone who wants to support the show. So go on to revpod.com, scroll down and click on Patreon. You can leave a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee, and that's on the same website, revpod.com. Scroll down and click on the yellow button. If you'd like to give in other ways, please do email the show and ask about that. The other thing I was going to say is, please do email us with your comments, criticisms, stories you'd like to share with us. Really love to get listeners' emails and to share them on the show. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And we are on X as well, as we were just saying, at Reverend Pod. Join us on X, because we will not be leaving to go to Bluesky. Right, Daniel. Well, I think it's time. Have you got a prayer that you can share with us?
I do. This is the prayer for next Sunday in the official Church of England lectionary, and it takes up that theme of God's transforming grace as our water is transformed into wine. Almighty God, in Christ you make all things new. So transform the poverty of our nature by the riches of your grace, and in the renewal of our lives make known your heavenly glory through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Daniel. Right. Well, good to be with you, Daniel, and thanks to everyone for listening. And until next time, keep watch.
And keep the faith.